The worst night of my career happened on Friday the 13th of September, 1985, at Winslow State Penitentiary, where the desert winds carry the screams of the condemned across the endless expanse of the Painted Desert. Winslow is a forgotten town on Route 66, population barely 9,000 souls, most of whom work in some capacity for the prison system that squats like a concrete cancer on the edge of civilization. I'm Cormac Blackwood, and I've spent the last 5 years as a records clerk in that godforsaken place, filing reports and maintaining the administrative machinery that keeps death row running smoothly. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and lets me care for my aging mother in the house where I was born. Most folks can't handle the psychological weight of working where men wait to die, but I've always been good with details, good with keeping my head down and my mouth shut. The Raven Wing houses our death row inmates, 37 souls waiting for their appointment in the final room, where Arizona carries out its executions by lethal injection. The wing got its name from the black metal ravens welded to the entrance gates, their beady eyes watching every soul who passes through. Local legend says they were crafted from the iron bars of the original territorial prison, that they're cursed to witness every death within these walls. In March of 1985, Aldrich Grimsby arrived on death row. He'd been convicted of murdering a young teller during a robbery at First National Bank of Winslow, shot her 3 times in the chest while she pleaded for her life. The case had shocked our small community. Sarah Beth Morrison was just 24, engaged to be married, with her whole life ahead of her. The prosecution painted Grimsby as a cold-blooded killer who'd executed an innocent girl for nothing more than the contents of a cash drawer. But from the moment Aldrich arrived, something felt wrong about him. I processed his intake paperwork, filed his medical records, cataloged his personal effects. He was 31, formerly a certified public accountant from Phoenix, with no prior criminal record. His hands were soft, uncalloused, not the hands of a career criminal. His eyes held an intelligence that seemed at odds with the senseless brutality of his alleged crime. Minerva Ashford, the night shift supervisor, noticed it too. She'd been working the Raven Wing for 10 years, had seen every type of killer imaginable, and she told me during one of our late-night coffee breaks that Grimsby didn't fit the pattern. "Most of them break down eventually," she said, stirring sugar into her cup with hands that trembled slightly, a nervous habit she developed after her husband died in a car accident 3 years prior. They rage, they cry, they make peace with their fate. But Grimsby, he's different. He's methodical, like he's working on something. She was right. While other condemned men spent their time writing letters to loved ones or staring at the ceiling in despair, Aldrich requested boxes of legal documents. He studied bank security footage transcripts, analyzed financial records, cross-referenced witness statements. He was building something, piece by piece, and it made my skin crawl to watch him work with such calculated precision. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came in August. I was filing incident reports when I noticed discrepancies in the evidence logs from Grimsby's case. Key pieces of forensic evidence had been checked out multiple times by Deputy Warden Barnabas Thornfield, unusual for someone in his position. Thornfield had been at Winslow for 15 years, climbing the ranks through a combination of political connections and ruthless ambition. He was the kind of man who commanded respect through fear, with cold gray eyes that seemed to see right through you. I mentioned the irregularities to Minerva, who grew quiet and told me to forget what I'd seen. "Some things are better left alone, Cormac," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't being watched. "Thornfield has friends in high places, friends who don't like questions." But I couldn't let it go. The records clerk in me demanded order, demanded that everything be properly documented and filed. So I kept digging, cross-referencing dates and signatures, building my own file of irregularities. What I found made my blood run cold. On the night Sarah Beth Morrison was murdered, Deputy Warden Thornfield had signed out from the prison at 10:47 p.m., 23 minutes before the bank robbery occurred. He'd returned at 2:15 a.m., claiming he'd been dealing with a family emergency that was never documented or verified. Moreover, Thornfield's financial records, which I accessed through administrative channels, showed massive debts from failed real estate investments. Debts that had mysteriously disappeared in the weeks following the bank robbery. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so terrifying that I could barely accept it. But before I could decide what to do with this information, everything changed. Friday the 13th started like any other night shift. I clocked in at 6 p.m., the September heat still radiating from the concrete walls despite the approaching darkness. The Raven Wing was unusually quiet. Even the desert wind had stilled, as if the very air was holding its breath. Minerva was already at her desk when I arrived, her usually sharp eyes clouded with worry. "Grimsby's been asking for you specifically," she said, without looking up from her paperwork. "Says he has something important to show you, something about his case." A chill ran down my spine. In 5 years of working death row, no inmate had ever requested to see me personally. I was just the records clerk, invisible as the filing cabinets I tended. Did he say what it was about? Minerva finally met my eyes, and I saw fear there, real, primal fear. "He knows, Cormac, about what you've been looking into, about the discrepancies." My mouth went dry. I'd been careful, or so I thought, but in a place like Winslow State Penitentiary, secrets had a way of bleeding through the walls. Before I could respond, the lights flickered, a common occurrence in the old building, but tonight it felt like an omen. At 8:30 p.m., I made my way to Aldrich's cell. He was sitting on his bunk, surrounded by neat stacks of legal documents, his pale face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light. When he saw me, he smiled. Not the desperate grin of a doomed man, but the satisfied expression of someone who'd just solved a complex equation. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his cultured voice carrying an odd note of triumph. "I've been waiting for you. I believe you'll find this interesting." He held up a manila folder, thick with documents. "It seems we've both been investigating the same discrepancies." I glanced around nervously. The corridor was empty, except for Officer Lazarus Pendleton, a mysterious figure who worked the night shift and rarely spoke to anyone. He stood in the shadows at the far end of the hall, his face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. "I can't take anything from you," I whispered. "You know the rules?" Aldrich's smile widened. "Oh, you won't need to take it. In about 15 minutes, there's going to be a power outage, a scheduled maintenance issue that will last exactly 12 minutes. During that time, my cell door will mysteriously malfunction, and I'll take a walk to the final room. When the lights come back on, this folder will be sitting on the execution table, and you'll be the one to find it." My blood turned to ice water. "How could you possibly know about?" "Because Deputy Warden Thornfield isn't the only one with friends in this place," Aldrich said quietly. "Some of us have been watching him for months, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. He killed that poor girl to cover his gambling debts, then framed me because I fit the physical description and happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But tonight, the truth comes out." As if summoned by his words, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. I heard the electronic lock on Aldrich's cell click open, and in the crimson darkness, he stepped into the corridor like a ghost returning from the grave. "Don't follow me for 5 minutes," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow hallway. "Let me do what needs to be done." I stood frozen as his footsteps faded toward the final room. In the distance, I could hear Minerva shouting orders, other guards running, radios crackling with confusion. But Officer Pendleton remained motionless in the shadows, as if he'd expected this exact scenario. When the lights flickered back on 12 minutes later, we found Aldrich Grimsby sitting in the execution chair, the manila folder clutched to his chest. He was still breathing, but barely. A thin line of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. The folder contained everything. Photographs of Thornfield leaving the bank, financial records proving his motive, witness statements that had been suppressed during the trial. "Tell them," Aldrich whispered as the medical team rushed in. "Tell them I was innocent." He died 30 seconds later, in the very chair where the state would have killed him anyway in just 3 weeks. The official report claimed he'd suffered a massive heart attack brought on by the stress of his escape attempt. But I saw no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence. It was as if his body had simply given up the moment he knew the truth would survive him. Deputy Warden Thornfield was arrested the next morning. The evidence in that folder was overwhelming, undeniable. He confessed everything during interrogation, broke down completely when confronted with his own crimes. 6 months later, he was executed in the same chair where Aldrich had died. But it was too late for Aldrich Grimsby. Too late for Sarah Beth Morrison. Too late for the truth to save the innocent. I left Winslow State Penitentiary 2 weeks after that night. Minerva quit the same day, saying she couldn't work in a place where justice moved like a glacier, too slow to save the living, only fast enough to bury the dead. Officer Pendleton disappeared without a word, leaving no forwarding address, as if he'd never existed at all. Sometimes, Late at night, I dream about the final room. I see Aldrich sitting in that chair, holding the truth against his chest, like a shield that arrived too late to protect him. And I wonder how many other innocent souls are sitting in cells across this country, waiting to die for crimes they didn't commit, hoping someone will believe them before the darkness closes in forever. The ravens at the Raven Wing entrance still watch every soul who passes through their gates. They've seen 37 executions since I left, and I wonder if any of those men died as innocent as Aldrich Grimsby. I wonder, and I pray I never find out. The summer of 1987 found me stuck in Bisbee, Arizona, working the graveyard shift at the Copper Queen Hotel, while most of my college friends were enjoying their break back home. At 23, I thought I had life figured out, but dropping out of Arizona State to help my grandmother Minerva pay her medical bills had left me scrambling for work in this forgotten mining town. The Copper Queen Hotel sat like a weathered monument on Main Street, its red brick facade telling stories of copper boom days when Bisbee was the liveliest town in the Arizona Territory. Built in 1902, the hotel had housed everyone from mining executives to traveling salesmen, but by the late 1980s, it mostly catered to curious tourists and the occasional ghost hunter drawn by whispered tales of paranormal activity. Bartholomew Ravencroft, the night manager, hired me after a 5-minute interview. A tall, gaunt man with premature gray hair and deep-set eyes, Bart had worked at the Copper Queen for 15 years and spoke about the building like it was a living thing with moods and temperaments. "Night security is simple, Thaddeus," he told me on my first evening, handing me a heavy ring of brass keys and a flashlight that had seen better days. "Walk the floors every hour, check the locks, make sure the guests aren't disturbing anyone else. Most importantly, stay out of the basement storage areas after midnight." I laughed. "Why, are there ghosts down there?" Bart's expression didn't change. "There are things in old buildings that are better left undisturbed. The basement was sealed off for a reason." My grandmother Minerva had warned me about the Copper Queen before I started working there. Having spent 40 years as a nurse at Copper Queen Community Hospital, she knew every story and legend in Bisbee. Over dinner, the night before my first shift, she set down her coffee cup and fixed me with that stern look I remembered from childhood. "That hotel has history, Thaddeus. Dark history. Back in 1943, there was a mine foreman named Cornelius Blackthorne who died in a cave-in down at the Lavender Pit. They never recovered his body, but they found his personal effects and brought them to the hotel where his widow was staying. She died of grief 3 days later, and they say Cornelius never left." "Grandma, you know I don't believe in ghost stories," I said, cutting into my pot roast. Her weathered hand reached across to touch mine. "I've lived in this town for 73 years, boy. I've seen things that would turn your hair white. Promise me you'll be respectful in that place. Some spirits just want to be left alone, but others are looking for something they lost." The first few weeks passed without incident. I walked my rounds, nodded to the occasional late-night guest, and spent most of my time reading paperback novels in the small security office near the front desk. The hotel's quirks became familiar: creaking floorboards that sounded like footsteps, old pipes that groaned in the walls, and the way shadows seemed to move in my peripheral vision. It was on a particularly quiet Tuesday night in August that everything changed. I was making my 2 a.m. rounds when I noticed something odd on the second floor. Room 218, which I knew was unoccupied, had a thin line of light showing under the door. I knocked softly and called out, thinking perhaps a guest had been moved there without my knowledge. No answer. I used my master key to enter and found the room empty, but the bedside lamp was on. As I reached to turn it off, I noticed the wallpaper near the window was peeling in a way I'd never seen before, revealing what looked like an older wall underneath. Curious, I pulled at the loose paper and discovered it wasn't wallpaper at all, but a false panel. Behind it was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for one person, leading down into darkness. The air that drifted up smelled of copper, mold, and something else I couldn't identify. Against my better judgment, I shone my flashlight into the passage and saw rough-hewn stone stairs descending into what appeared to be part of the original mine workings beneath the hotel. I should have called Bart. I should have sealed the panel back up and pretended I'd never found it. Instead, I squeezed through the opening and began my descent into the hidden depths of the Copper Queen Hotel. The stairs went down much farther than I expected, and the temperature dropped noticeably with each step. My flashlight beam revealed timber supports and pickaxe marks on the walls, evidence of the mining operations that had once riddled this entire hillside with tunnels. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small chamber that had obviously been used as some kind of storage area. Wooden crates lined the walls, most of them rotted and collapsed, their contents scattered across the dirt floor. Mining equipment, old lamps, coils of rope, and personal belongings created an archaeological layer cake of the hotel's forgotten history. In the center of the room sat a desk, its surface covered with papers that crumbled at my touch. It was there, in the bottom drawer of that desk, that I found it. A gold pocket watch, tarnished but still intact, with an intricate engraving on the back. To Cornelius Blackthorne, from your loving father, Christmas 1925. The moment my fingers closed around the watch, the temperature in the room plummeted, and I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps. Heavy boots on stone, coming down the stairs I had just ascended. I clicked off my flashlight and pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the pocket watch so tightly its edges cut into my palm. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and in the absolute darkness, I could hear slow, deliberate movement around the chamber. Whatever was down there with me was searching, methodically examining each corner of the room. A smell filled the air, sulfur, coal dust, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Then I heard breathing, labored and wet, like someone with lungs full of dirt and debris. My heart hammered so loudly, I was certain whatever was in that room could hear it. The breathing stopped directly in front of where I stood. In the darkness, I felt, rather than saw, something reach toward me, and a voice whispered in my ear with the rasp of crushed stone. "Give it back." I ran. Somehow I found the stairs in the pitch black and scrambled up them, the pocket watch still clenched in my fist. I squeezed through the passage, sealed the panel as best I could, and didn't stop running until I was back in the security office, with all the lights on and the door locked. My hand shook as I examined the watch under the desk lamp. The inscription was clear, and when I wound it, the mechanism still worked, ticking with a steady rhythm that seemed unnaturally loud in the small office. I called in sick for the rest of my shift and drove home to my grandmother's house as the sun was rising over the Dragoon Mountains. Minerva took one look at me and immediately put the kettle on for tea. When I showed her the pocket watch and told her what had happened, her face went pale. "You found Cornelius Blackthorne's watch," she said quietly. "The one thing they never recovered from the cave-in. His widow Sarah waited in room 218 for weeks, hoping they'd find his body and his father's watch. She said he never took it off, that it was the most precious thing he owned. Grandma, I saw something down there. I heard—" "You disturbed his rest," she interrupted. "And now he knows you have what belongs to him." That night, the activity started at my grandmother's house. We heard the unmistakable sound of mining tools scraping against the exterior walls. The smell of sulfur and coal dust seeped through the windows, even though they were tightly closed. Most disturbing of all, we could hear the steady tick-tick-tick of a pocket watch echoing through the walls, even though I had hidden Cornelius's watch in my bedroom drawer. Minerva barely slept, and by the third night, she looked haggard and worn. "This has to end, Thaddeus. That spirit won't rest until his property is returned, and his presence is making both of us sick." She called her friend Isadora Thornfield, a spiritual cleanser from Sedona who specialized in helping restless spirits find peace. Isadora was a lean woman with silver hair and piercing green eyes, who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen the worst the spirit world had to offer and survived. After examining the watch and walking through our house, Isadora sat us down at the kitchen table with grim expressions. "Cornelius Blackthorne died violently and unexpectedly. His spirit has been trapped in those tunnels for 44 years, searching for the one connection he had to his father and his former life. Taking the watch from its resting place has awakened him fully, and he won't stop until it's returned." "Can't I just put it back where I found it?" I asked. Isadora shook her head. "It's not enough now. The watch needs to be placed where Cornelius died, in the actual cave-in site, and you'll need to perform a proper ritual to help his spirit cross over. The Lavender Pit mine was a massive open excavation on the outskirts of Bisbee, but Isadora knew exactly where the 1943 cave-in had occurred. Armed with sage, salt, and specific instructions for the cleansing ritual, I climbed down into the pit at midnight, following Isadora's directions to a section where old timber supports still marked the entrance to collapsed tunnels. I placed the pocket watch on a flat stone at the tunnel entrance and began the ritual Isadora had taught me, speaking words of respect and release while burning sage in the desert wind. As I completed the final blessing, the watch began to tick one last time, its sound echoing off the canyon walls. The ticking stopped. The oppressive presence that had followed me for days lifted like a weight being removed from my chest. In the silence that followed, I heard something that might have been a voice saying, "Thank you," or might have been just the wind through the mine supports. I never went back to work at the Copper Queen Hotel. Bart understood when I called to quit and simply said that some people weren't meant for night security work. I finished my degree through correspondence courses and eventually became a mining safety inspector, spending my career ensuring that other Cornelius Blackthorns wouldn't be lost to preventable accidents. Sometimes, when I'm inspecting old mine sites, I'll find personal effects that belong to long-dead workers. I always make sure they're properly returned to their families, or, if no family can be found, given respectful burial. I learned that night in the lavender pit that the dead don't ask for much, just recognition, respect, and the chance to let go of what once anchored them to this world. The Copper Queen Hotel still stands in Bisbee, still tells its ghost stories to tourists, and still hides its secrets and passages most people never find. But I know that at least one restless spirit finally found peace, reunited with the precious gift his father had given him so many years before. Back in 2009, I was still trying to figure out how to live without Margaret. 3 years since the cancer took her, and I was drifting through my days like a ghost haunting my own life. That's when Dr. Cordelia Ashworth contacted me about guiding her research expedition into the Superstition Mountains. Cordelia was a folklore professor from Northern Arizona University, mid-40s, sharp as a desert hawk and twice as focused. She'd spent 2 decades documenting southwestern legends with the methodical precision of a scientist. What she needed was someone who knew the mountain's geology, its hidden trails and unstable ground. Someone who could keep her alive while she chased old stories. I was a petroleum geologist by trade, but the superstitions had been my weekend escape for 20 years. Margaret and I used to hike those trails together, back when the world made sense. After she died, I kept going alone, partly for the solitude, partly because those red cliffs and ancient volcanic ridges were the only place I still felt like myself. Cordelia's research focused on what the Apache called the shadow that walks. According to tribal accounts dating back centuries, something moved through the deepest canyons of the superstitions after dark. Not animal, not human, but something that collected the dying moments of anyone who perished in those mountains. The Apache avoided certain areas entirely, considering them cursed ground where the boundary between life and death had worn thin. I need to document these accounts properly, Cordelia explained over coffee in Apache Junction. But I need someone who won't get me killed wandering around in the dark with a camera and recording equipment. I should have said no, should have stuck to my weekend solo hikes and evening whiskey. But Cordelia had this intensity about her work that reminded me of Margaret's passion for her art therapy practice. Besides, I was curious about the areas even seasoned climbers avoided. We planned a 3-day expedition for early November, when the desert nights grew cold and the tourist crowds thinned out. Cordelia brought professional-grade recording equipment, cameras with night vision capability, and an electromagnetic field detector she'd borrowed from a colleague who studied atmospheric phenomena. "If there's a rational explanation," she said, "I'll find it." The first day went smoothly. I guided her to several sites where people had reported encounters with the shadow. Weaver's Needle area, the lower reaches of Peralta Canyon, the old mining camps where prospectors had died of exposure or worse. Cordelia documented everything meticulously, recording GPS coordinates, taking photographs, noting environmental conditions. But it was the second night that changed everything. We'd made camp in a sheltered alcove near what miners in the 1890s called Devil's Canyon. The name wasn't folklore. It came from the number of bodies they'd pulled out of that narrow gorge over the years. Cave-ins, flash floods, men who simply vanished without explanation. Cordelia wanted to record there because the Apache stories were most specific about that location. "They say the shadow feeds on violent death," she explained, adjusting her equipment as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. "If there's electromagnetic activity associated with these sightings, this is where we'll detect it." I built a small fire and heated water for coffee while Cordelia set up her instruments. The November air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter, and the silence of the desert settled around us like a heavy blanket. No wind, no insects, no small animals moving through the brush. Just the crackle of burning mesquite and the distant sound of Cordelia's equipment humming to life. At 9:47 p.m., her electromagnetic detector started screaming, the needle pegged to the maximum reading, indicating magnetic fields that shouldn't exist in empty desert. Cordelia grabbed her camera and started shooting, her scientific training overriding any sense of caution. That's when we saw it emerge from the canyon mouth below us. It wasn't shadow in any normal sense. It was absence, a space where light went to die. The thing moved upslope toward our camp with deliberate purpose, flowing like liquid darkness over rocks and vegetation. No footsteps, no sound at all, except the increasingly frantic beeping of Cordelia's equipment. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to the .45 I carried for mountain lions and unstable prospectors. But bullets don't stop darkness. The shadow reached our campfire first. The flames didn't go out. They turned black, still dancing and crackling, but producing no light, no heat. The temperature around us plummeted. Not the gradual cold of desert night, but the sudden, brutal cold of deep winter, of death itself. Cordelia kept taking pictures, even as the thing flowed over her boots and started climbing her legs. I shouted her name, lunged forward to grab her arm, but the moment my hand touched that darkness, the mountains disappeared. I wasn't in the desert anymore. I was suspended in absolute void, weightless and blind, breathing air that tasted of copper and decay. But I wasn't alone in that darkness. Things moved around me, not seen, but felt, like pressure changes in deep water. Then the visions began. I saw death after death in those mountains, stretching back through time like frames in some hellish film reel. Spanish conquistadors dying of thirst in hidden canyons, their armor cooking them alive under the desert sun. Apache warriors falling to cavalry bullets, bleeding out on stone that drank their blood like rain. Prospectors trapped in collapsed mine shafts, scratching at rock walls until their fingernails were gone, and madness took them. But these weren't just random deaths. They were the violent ones, the terrified ones. The deaths where men realized in their final moments that they were utterly, completely alone, and something was collecting those moments, feeding on that terminal despair like a connoisseur savoring fine wine. I saw a family of settlers in 1883, their wagon broken down in Devil's Canyon during a flash flood. The father tried to save his children as the water rose, but the current was too strong. I watched him drown, knowing he'd failed them, his last breath full of their screams. I saw a miner in 1902 who discovered something in the deepest tunnels beneath the mountains, something that wasn't gold. He'd run screaming toward daylight, but the darkness had followed him out, wrapped around him like living tar. He died understanding that some things should never be unearthed. The visions came faster, overlapping, centuries of agony compressed into moments. This thing, this shadow, wasn't just a predator. It was an archivist of human suffering, cataloging every terrified death in his territory. And now it was adding our terror to its collection. I don't know how long I was trapped in that void. Time meant nothing there. But eventually, I felt solid ground beneath my knees again. The familiar bite of gravel and sand. I opened eyes I didn't remember closing and found myself back at our campsite. The fire was normal again, casting orange light on Red Canyon walls. Cordelia's equipment had gone silent, but Cordelia herself sat motionless beside the dead embers, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. "Cordelia?" My voice came out as a croak. She turned toward me slowly, mechanically. Her face was pale in the firelight, and when she spoke, her voice was flat and empty. "It's real," she said. "All of it. Every story, every legend. There are things that exist in the spaces between life and death, and they've been here longer than we can imagine." I tried to reach for her, but she flinched away. "I saw what it collects," she continued. "I saw what it's going to collect. We're not getting out of here unchanged, Holden. We're part of its catalog now." We packed up in silence and hiked out by starlight. Didn't speak during the drive back to Apache Junction. Cordelia disappeared from my life as thoroughly as if the shadow had swallowed her completely. Her university said she'd taken leave for personal reasons. Her apartment stood empty. Her research files were sealed. That was 15 years ago. I still live in the same house Margaret and I shared, still work the same job, still drink the same whiskey. But everything is different now, because sometimes in the corner of my vision, I see that darkness moving. In alleyways, in basement corners, in the space beneath my bedroom door at 3 a.m. I know what Cordelia meant about being part of its catalog. The shadow doesn't just collect the moment of death, it collects the fear that comes before, the knowledge that something vast and hungry is watching, waiting. Some nights I think about driving back to Devil's Canyon, finishing what we started. But I know better now, the shadow doesn't want us dead. It wants us afraid. And as long as I'm afraid, as long as I remember what lurks in the darkness between the mountains, I'm still feeding it, still part of its collection.